Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. So in today's video we are going to build this Excel app with Tkinter. So what this app does is it connects to a certain Excel sheet that we have. In this case this is going to be our people Excel sheet. This is just some random data about certain people, employment, things like that. What it's going to do is it will read this data, display it here in what we call a Tkinter Treeview, which allows us to create this table here. You can see we have different columns and rows. You can actually scroll and look at it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use this form right here to also insert new data into this Excel sheet. So this is meant to be an interactive app in which you use both Excel with Python as well as Tkinter, which is a Python GUI library to create this desktop app. We will also be using a Tkinter theme to make it look like this. This is why it has these green accents, these colors. This is all part of a Tkinter theme and I'll show you more about it in the video. This is to make our interface look much more modern and much more presentable. So without further ado, let's get started. So the theme I'm going to use is something called the Forest-ttk theme. So this is a theme that I previously talked about in a previous video. I'm going to link that down below if you're interested. But basically this was created by an individual. The username is RD I'm still not sure how to pronounce it. And they created this theme to make Tkinter actually look like Excel. So they use these green accents and the gray accents as well to make it look like Excel. And this is how the theme looks like in light mode and how it looks like in dark mode. Now to use this theme, we're going to need the forestdark.tcl file, the forestlight.tcl file. So one of them is obviously for dark mode and one of them is for light mode. And we're going to need both of the folders for these themes. These contain the actual settings and code for the theme. And the TCL files will be used to load the themes themselves. So what I need to do is if I go to VS Code, now here this is some starter code, I'll talk about this in just a second, let me actually close this. But as you can see here, this is my project structure, these are my folders. I have the forest-dark folder, the forest-light folder, and the forest-dark TCL file, and the forest-light TCL file. So as I mentioned, you can get these from the theme GitHub repo. So you can see here, I will link this also in the description. Make sure to clone it and copy what you need. So these are the folders and files related to the theme. Now the other files that we have the people.xl file. So this is where all our data will be stored. This is an Excel sheet. You can open it with Microsoft Excel. I can even show you how. So if I open my file explorer, you see people Excel file here. And if I load it, you can see this is the Excel file. We're going to talk a bit more about the data in just a second, but for now, this is how it looks like. And other than that, we have our main.py file. This one right here, this is just a temp file. You can ignore it. This is what VS Code uses to store temporary data. Now here, this is our main.py file. So if I open it, you can see we have some starter code. Now, all the starter code and everything else will be linked in the description down below, as well as the full source code for your reference. So feel free to use that as we go along in this video. So this is our starter code. Let me start by explaining it. So let's take a look at our starter code. First things first, we have some imports. I'm importing Tkinter as TK. Then from Tkinter, I'm importing TTK. So TTK is a package or a submodule that you can use to get the themed widgets of Tkinter. This is what allows us to use these themes with Tkinter and make our interface look much more modern. Next, what I'm going to do is I will create a root widget. So the root is equal to tk.tk. This is our root widget, or actually our window. So if I actually run this right now, you're going to see an empty window just like that. This is our root window. It's the parent widget of all other widgets in Tkinter. More on that later. Finally, what I'm doing is I'm running root.mainLoop. So this is the event loop that is going to launch my application. Without this, there would be no application. It's like an infinite loop that keeps on executing so long as your app is running. When I close my app, this is when this main loop stops executing. Alright, now that I have the basics, let's start by adding the widgets. Obviously, what we want to do is we want to go from this to this. So this is the reference of our interface. This is what our end result should look like. We're going to start by first creating this frame right here and all the widgets inside of it. So we're going to create the form related to inserting the row before actually creating the tree view. The first thing we need to do is we need to actually use the theme that we downloaded. So while we do have the folders and the files here, we still haven't actually called it from our Python code. To do so, first I will create a variable called style. This will be a ttk.style. So this is what will enable us to apply a theme to our Tkinter application. And we need to use ttk, not tk. So we're using the themed Tkinter. And then we say here that the parent is the root. So we applied the style variable. The next thing we need to do, we need to actually call the TCL files that we have here. To do so, we just do the following. We say root.tk.call, and then we say source. So here we're sourcing a file, and this is what we're calling. So the forest-light.tcl and the forest-dark.tcl. After calling these, I need to choose what theme I want to use. So we're just going to say style.themeUse forest-dark. Alright, so now we're using the dark theme. Later on, we'll see how we can also use light mode as well. So we're using the dark theme. The next thing we want to do is we want to start creating our widgets. First things first, we will create something called a frame. So we say ttk.frame and the parent will be a root. So why do I say parent? In Tkinter, widgets are actually organized using a hierarchy. We have the root window. As I told you, this is the parent of everything else. It's the root widget. It's like the largest box. And then inside of it, we're going to have nested boxes. So this is going to be the largest box, the widget. Then inside it may be another box. And then inside that box, other boxes and things like that. If we go back to our reference, you can see that here, the entire window, this is our root widget. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a frame inside of it. The reason I create a frame is to keep my UI more responsive, and I'll show you why later on in the video. But for now, we're just going to create this frame, and inside the frame, we'll put all our different widgets. So frame is created very easily. You say ttk.frame, and the parent is root. Like I said, every widget in Tkinter should have a parent. So in this case, the parent is the root widget. And now, to actually add the frame to my screen, I use something called pack. So this pack is what will enable my screen to be responsive and make my application more interactive and resizable. So I'll show you how later on in the video. Because in fact, if I run this right now, as you can see, now it's totally empty. But if I do resize it, you can see there's a blank window. So let's start by adding the widgets and we'll see how they look. All right, the first thing we're going to do is we need to also group our widgets. So we have created a frame. As you can see here, we have the root window, and then we have created a frame inside of it. The frame is basically transparent, so you can't really see it. But now what we want to do is we need to create another subframe or something that we call a label frame. If you look here, this insert row with the box around it, this is a label frame. This frame is actually visible, it's not invisible, and it has a title. So to create it, it's also very simple. So what we do is we say widgets frame, this is what I choose to call it, ttk.labelFrame, and then I say the parent is frame and the text is insert row. So what do I mean by the parent is frame this time? As I was saying before, it's like you have nested boxes inside of each other. So if we go back to the image, you can see that you have here the largest frame, which is the largest widget inside the root. So you have the window, the biggest box, root. Then you have frame inside of that. So this will be the frame, the second box. Then you have the insert row, the label frame, inside of the frame. So it's like having different boxes of different sizes inside of each other. So this is why the parent for insert row, this will be the frame and not the root itself. So now we specified the parent and we specify the text. So the title, in this case, this is going to be insert row like I just showed you. Now, if I run it, you will see nothing has been added to my screen. It's still blank. The reason is in Tkinter, nothing gets added to your screen unless you do two steps. The first step is to create the widget, like here, you say ttk.labelFrame. The second step is to use either pack, place, or grid, which are the geometry managers of Tkinter. These allow you to position your different elements on your screen and actually add them to your screen. So if you don't run either pack, place, or grid, so you can see here we have pack, if you don't do that, you will not see your widget on the screen. And I'll demonstrate more examples as we go along in the video. So now, the next thing I need to do is I will say grid this time, and this will be row equals 0 and column equals 0. So the difference between pack and grid, pack, you don't really specify the row and the column, things just get added sequentially to the screen. However, in grid, it's like you divide your screen into a grid and you have to specify the different indexes. So what we did right here, if I can annotate this, here you can see we just split this screen into two. We created a grid, and now this is row 0, column 0. And now this part here, this will be row 0 as well, but it will be column 1. So this is how a grid looks like, and this is how we divided our application. These are geometry managers. You use those to better position your elements on the screen and to manage their different locations. This is really important. However, I'm not going to go too deep into it in this video because the purpose of this video is to create this project and not just talk about geometry managers. The next thing we want to do is we need to add some widget into this label frame so we can start seeing it. Alright, the first widget we're going to add is actually going to be an entry. This is where the user will type the name of the person. So let's add it. First things first is we do this. So we say name underscore entry. This is the variable name. You can name this whatever you want. This will be a ttk.entry, and in this time the parent will be the widgets frame. So again, going back to this hierarchy, the root is the biggest widget, it's the biggest box. Inside it we have frame, inside frame we have widgets underscore frame, and inside the widgets underscore frame we have the name underscore entry. So this is going to be our entry, and it's going to be nested inside this widgets frame. To see it, of course, if we run it now, we won't be able to see it. To see it, we just do this. So let's also add it inside a grid. Again, this will say row 0, column 0. Why is that? This is because this time the grid is inside the insert row. So let me just change the color. So here, we're creating another grid. And this grid will look like this. And it will be inside the insert row label frame. So here, this will be row 0 and column 0. We only have one column. So of course, the index starts at 0 as things usually do with coding. But we only have one column. So this will be column 0. And the row in this case, this is row 0. Here, this is row 1. This is row 2. And so on. So we'll get to those in just a second. But this is why we specify the row is equal to 0 and the column is equal to 0. When I say sticky equals EW, here this means east-west. What I'm trying to say is expand it both east and west. So I'll show you when we run it. Running it, now you can see we have this insert row. This is the label frame, and inside it, this is the entry. So you can come here and you can type random things. So when you press on it, you can just type anything. And also notice this green accent for this entry. This is due to the theme that we're using, which is this Forest-ttk theme. All right. So now we have created our very first entry. Obviously, the UI doesn't look that great, but we're going to build it slowly. The EW, what this does, the sticky equal EW, it expanded it to fill up the size of the label frame. Now running it again, you can see it takes up the entire space in the label frame, both east and west, so horizontally it takes up this space. Alright, so we have created the entry, but now in our app, it's still empty. It doesn't show name as a placeholder like we have here. To do that, it's very easy. We just add this line of code. We say insert 0 name. Now what 0 means is you have to insert this piece of text right here, this string, at a certain index. So you can insert it at the end of whatever text we have. You can insert it at the start. You can insert it at index 5. But why do we say 0? What this means is simply insert it at the very start of this entry. So start it here at 0. And now you can see we have name right here. One actual bug, let me rerun it and show you. So this is a problem that we have. If we press on this entry and we start typing, you can see that the name part is still here, which obviously isn't useful. It's bad user experience because here the user still has to erase everything and write down their name. All right, so how can we fix it? To fix it, we also have a quick fix. So one line of code, and this is the line of code. What we need to do here is we need to use the binding, So we need to bind a certain event with a certain function. Now the event that we're going to bind is focus in. What focus in means, it means that when you click on this entry, so let me run it and show you. So you can see here we have, we have here the name. If I press on this, if I focus here, I'm doing this focus in action. So by pressing on it, you see that the name disappeared and now I can write my name. So this is what we call focus in. When you put your mouse inside an entry and now you're able to type in it. So we bind this focus in so that when the user does this focus in, we want to call another function. So we use lambda to actually call this function. You say lambda e, or you can name this anything that you want, to call a certain function. The function we're going to call is simply name underscore entry dot delete 0 end. Dot delete is very similar to name.entry.insert. So here, insert, what it does is it inserts a certain piece of text into your entry. Delete, what it does is it just clears the text. And we say from 0 till end. This means you clear everything from the start till the very finish. By doing so, you have cleared the entry and now the user can type whatever they want. So to demo this again, you run it, you see you have here name as a placeholder. Once you press on the entry, you can begin typing and the name disappears. So it has been totally cleared. Alright, so that is it for our first widget, which is the entry. The next thing we want to do is we want to create our second widget, which is this age Spinbox right here. So a Spinbox is something in Tkinter that you use to have different numbers. So these arrow buttons, the up and down arrow button, will enable you to go up and down certain numbers to insert the user's age. So let's see how we're going to create it. First things first, let's create the Spinbox. So I will call it age underscore Spinbox, and this will be ttk.spinbox widgets underscore frame. Again, this is inside the label frame, and I will specify the ages that I want. So the age I want to start is 18 and up until the age of 100. So next, we need to add it to our interface. Again, if I actually just clear this and run this app, you can see that the Spinbox was not added yet. Why is that? As I said before, in Tkinter, you actually need to do two different steps. First step is you create your widget, such as here, ttk.spinbox, and the second step, you need to use pack or grid to actually add your widget to your screen, to position the widget on the screen. So here I say grid, row equal 1 and column equal 0. So we use these simply because, as I showed you here, this is our grid. The column is still 0, but the row is now 1. And now what I do is I say sticky equal EW. So again, I want to expand it horizontally, both sides, east and west. So now let's actually run it. And as you can see, we have a Spinbox. If I use the arrows, you can change numbers and I can insert the user's age. So you have 18 and you can go up until 100. The Spinbox is actually a Tkinter entry behind the scenes. You can actually type stuff here, but this would be an error and would create different problems. So this is a Spinbox. You can use the arrows to get the numbers. Now again, notice one thing. If I rerun it, you can see there's no placeholder yet that says age, because in our image, our reference, it should say age. We will use a very similar approach to what we did with the name entry. We just say age underscore spinbox.insert 0 age, and this will give me the age here, and automatically when I press on these buttons, the age will go away and we're going to get the numbers. So this is it for the Spinbox. Now I have the Spinbox and the entry. The next thing I want to create is this drop-down menu, which is going to alert me as to whether this user is subscribed or not. So we're going to have three options, as you can see here from the table. We're going to have subscribed, not subscribed, and other. So this is just some random data that I was using as an example, but you can put anything that you want here. So to create this drop-down menu, we need to use something called a combo box in Tkinter. Combo boxes are what we usually refer to as drop-down menus. To do so, simply what you need to do is the following. So I will call this status underscore combo box. This will be ttk.combobox. It will be inside the widgets frame. And then we will grid it. It will be row 2 and then column 0. Because again, you can see row 0, 1, 2. This is row 2, column 0. So running it, let's see what we have. You see we have a drop-down menu here. Obviously, it's empty because we haven't given it which options we want. So this is the drop-down menu. Again, it also looks like a Tkinter entry. You can actually type stuff here, but this isn't the purpose that we want. We want the drop-down menu. To add values to our drop-down menu, we need to do the following. So let's actually first ignore this line of code, and you see here we have values equal combo list. I'll explain this line of code as well later on. So values equal combo list, this means that the values of this combo box, the values of the drop-down menu, will be from this combo underscore list. So I just create this variable. You can see here combo underscore list. This will be equal to subscribed, not subscribed, and other. So if you want to add different options to your combo box, this is where you would add them. So you can write anything that you want, and these will appear in your drop-down menu. Let me actually comment this line here first. and show you how this will look like. So you see here we have this drop down menu. If I press on this, you can see we have 3 different options: subscribed, not subscribed, and other. So we have successfully created a combo box or a drop down menu. One thing you can notice here is that it's still empty before I press on my drop down. So what I want to do is I want to set this to be subscribed by default. So we'll use this line of code right here to select the first option from our combo list. So what this does is it says status combobox.current 0. 0 means the first item from the combo list. In this case, this is subscribed. So let me show you the difference if we run it now. As you can see now, it says subscribed by default rather than having a blank entry. So now we can select and change the value. We can say other, whatever we want. But this is our third item. So our third widget is this combo box. All right. Now we have our first 3 widgets. The next thing that we want to do is we want to create this checkbox right here. This will specify whether or not this user is employed. So we will have 2 options in our sheet. This will be employed and unemployed. And we'll get this using this checkbox. So let's see how we can do it. First, we create the check button. This will be ttk.checkButton, and of course the parent is widgets frame. We specify the text. In this case, the text should say employed. So the text is whatever gets displayed here next to the check button. Now, after creating it, we need to assign this to a variable. In this case, this variable will store the value of whether or not this check button has been checked. More on that later when we actually retrieve these values and add them to the Excel sheet. So we say variable equal a. I just chose to call it a, and a will be equal to tk.boolean_var. So this will be a boolean variable. It will be either true or false depending on whether or not this check button is checked. So here I created my check button. What I want to do next is I want to add it to my screen. So I do so using the grid. This will be row 3, column 0. And now I say sticky equal NSEW. This means north, south, east, and west. So it should be expanded in all 4 directions. All right. I've created it. Let's run it and see how it looks like. And now you can see that this is my check button. You can press on it, check it, uncheck it. So by default, it's unchecked. Okay, so now we're starting to get our widgets. One thing I want to note is if you resize this, you can see that it stays here in the center of the screen. And if I just resize it using this or using this, you can see here it stays in the top center. This is because this behavior is actually due to the fact that we created this frame. So this frame we created at the start and we packed it. So pack by default allows our interface to be responsive and to remain centered in the screen. So because everything is inside this frame, our entire interface remains in the center when we resize our screen. So I just wanted to note this in case you were wondering why we use this frame to begin with. All right. So we have all of our input widgets. The next thing we want is to create this button. So obviously here this is row 3, and this will be row 4. So to create our button, again, very simple. We say button is equal to ttk.button. The parent is widgets frame as well, and the text, so the text displayed on the button is insert. Now to add it to our screen, we use grid. Again, row 4, column 0, and we will expand this north, south, east, west. So running it, you see now we have a button. If we click on it, nothing happens because we haven't written the code for this functionality yet. But this is how it looks like. The thing we can note here is the fact that everything is kind of squished together and it doesn't look very nice and doesn't look very appealing. Of course, in our reference, you can see they're better spaced out. Obviously, I annotated over them, but they are better spaced out and they look better. Now to fix this, we're going to use something called padding. So padding will enable us to create spacing between these different widgets. To specify padding, it's very easy. So we're going to start by assigning the padding to the widgets frame. If I say pad x equal 20 and pad y equal 10, and if I run it now, you see now there's spacing between the label frame and the rest of the window. So this padding was created. You can see x, so horizontally here, the padding is 20 on both sides, and the padding is 10 vertically on the y-axis. So this is how you create padding. So now I've spaced out my label frame from the rest of the screen. The next thing I want to do is to add padding and space out my widgets from each other. Here we say pad x is equal to 5, pad y is equal to 0 and comma 5. Now what this means is that the pad y will be different on each side. So this will be 0 at the top and 5 at the bottom. So now running this, you see now name is spaced out. It has some padding here. So I'm going to go ahead and add padding to the rest of our widgets. So for age, we add a padding of X and Y, both sides. Now here, padding XY again for the combo box. Let's do the same for the check button as well as the button. Now if I run it, it should look much better. As you can see, everything is now spaced out and it looks way more presentable and way more readable for the user who's going to be using it. Alright, now the next thing we want to add is a separator, as you can see right here. So this little line right here, this is a separator. And why do we choose to add it? Well, this part of the form is used to insert information into our Excel sheet. However, this is going to be used for both light and dark mode. So they're not really related. So this is why I choose to use a separator, just to make it more clear for the user what the point of these different things are. So to add my separator, very simple, I use ttk.separator. The parent is widgets frame. I say the row is 5, column is 0. I specify this padding on the X, this padding on the Y, and I want to expand it both east and west. So as you can see, this here should be row 5, and this is row 6. So now running it, you can see we have a small separator right here. The last thing we're going to add on this side of the screen is going to be our little switch here that's going to enable us to switch between dark and light mode. So to do so, what we do is the following. So we say mode underscore switch. This is what I choose to call it. This will be a check button as well. So similar to how we had this check button before for the employed option, we will use a ttk.checkButton as well. So here the parent will be widgets frame and the text will be mode. And of course, I need to add it using the grid. I say row equal 6, column equals 0, and I specify the padding and I expand it in all sides. So running it now, let's see how it looks like. You see, this is a check button. Now, this doesn't really help us because how is this related to the switch that I just showed you in the reference photo? Now, to do so, simply what you specify is this property. You say style equals switch, and now you run it, and now you can see you have this toggle button or this switch button right here. Now, the next thing I want to do is that when I press on the switch button, I want to be able to change my UI from dark mode into light mode. To do so, what I first add is the following. So to my mode switch, the check button that I use for the switch, I add this property. I say command equal toggle mode. Now what command does is that it links your widget to a certain function. Here what I'm saying is when the user presses on the mode switch button, when they switch or when they toggle this button, I want to go ahead and execute this toggle mode function. So this was going to be a function that I create myself. Now to create it, we're just going to simply create the function. So we say def toggle underscore mode. This is going to be the function. Again, when I press on this switch, I will go ahead and execute this function. So this is what I'm telling Python to do. Now, what should be inside of this function? Simply what we're going to do is toggle between both dark mode and light mode. This is very easy. To do so, we need to get the switch. So here we say mode underscore switch, we get the state. So we say if it's in state selected, selected means that we have pressed on it once. So if we have pressed on it once, what I'm going to do is simply say the following. I say style.theme underscore use forest light. So here I'm saying I want to use the forest light theme. So let's run it and try it out. Now here we have the very same interface. Now I'm going to press on my switch, and as you can see, my interface has been switched into light mode. So this is how it looks like now. This is light mode. Now if I want to switch it back into dark mode and I press on it, nothing happens. This is because we also need to add a few lines of code. So we want to say else, so the alternative, we just switched it back. I want to use forest-dark. Now running it now. If we go to light mode, or we can go back to dark mode, and we can do the same thing over and over again. So now we have coded the part related to the theme and going from dark mode to light mode and back. Now we don't need to worry about this anymore. So even when we add other UI elements such as the Treeview, we're not going to actually need to do anything related to light mode and dark mode. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to create this Treeview right here, which will allow us to see our Excel data in a table. So going back to the Excel file, let's first take a look at it. We have 4 different columns. We have the name, age, subscription, where we keep track of whether or not a certain user is subscribed. We even have an other option here. And the employment, where we keep track whether the user is employed or unemployed. So this is how our data looks like. It's in these 4 different columns and it's inside this people.excel file. Now we want to load it into our interface. We're going to use something called the Tkinter Treeview. To do so, here's how we do it. First things first is we're going to create a frame for this Treeview. Now remember how before we created a larger frame, then we created here this label frame on the side. We're going to need a frame here to house both our Treeview as well as this scroll bar right here. So to create the frame, we're just going to call it tree frame and it will be equal to ttk.frame. So this is how it looks like. Next, we will say that we have to use the grid. So we say row is 0, column is 1. Note that here the parent is the frame. So this is the largest frame that we had. It's the parent of our tree frame. And like I showed you, you see here the brown colored annotations. You have here 2 columns, 0 and 1, and 1 row. So this is why we say row 0, column 1. Now that we've created the tree frame, we want to then create the tree view. So first we specify the names of the columns. So here cols is going to contain all the names of our columns. In this case, name, age, subscription, and employment, just like here in our Excel file. Now that we have the columns, we can go ahead and create the tree view. Here this will be ttk.treeview. The parent will be tree frame, so this is inside tree frame. We say show equal headings so that we only see the columns that we have headings for. We don't want to see an additional column which is related to hierarchy in tree views. This isn't part of our current application. Next, we specify the columns is equal to cols and the height is equal to 13. This means I want to show 13 different rows in my table. Finally, I just say treeview.pack. Now let's run it and see what we have now. As you can see, we have this table right here. However, there's no data in it because we haven't really loaded the data from the Excel file. This is just how it looks like. You can see we have 1, 2, 3, and 4 different, you can see here 4 different columns. However, they don't have names yet. You'll see why later on in the video. So we just created the tree view. The next thing I want to create is the scroll bar, which we're going to attach to the tree view so that we're able to scroll through it. Going back to the reference image, you see here we have this scroll bar right here, which will enable us to scroll in the tree view. So to create it, it's very simple. We just call it tree scroll. This will be a ttk.scroll bar and the parent will be tree frame as well. Then we're just going to pack it. I say side equal right to make sure that it stays on the right side, and then fill equal y to make it fill up the entire vertical axis and take up the entire space vertically. Now let's run it again. As you can see, we have the scroll bar right here. It's currently full because there's nothing to scroll with. The last step is I actually need to link my scroll bar to my tree view. So they have to be linked together so that when I scroll on the scroll bar, I'm actually affecting the tree view. To do that, very simple, you just say treescroll.config command equal treeview.yview. This means I'm configuring that the tree view moves along the y-axis with my scroll bar. And also another thing I need to add is here. So y-scroll command, this is a property we add to the tree view. We say y-scroll command equals treescroll.set. One thing you may have noticed is that the tree view is actually pretty big and these columns are pretty big as well. So to reduce the width of this tree view, we can just set the width as follows. So using here, so I can say treeview.column. So let's say the column with the name, it will be a width of 100. Age will have a width of 50, subscription has a width of 100, and employment has a width of 100. You may be wondering, how can we refer to name, age, subscription, even though we can't really see them on the headings? This is because internally, this is what these columns are named as. We just haven't yet displayed them on the tree view. So now, if I run this, you can see the tree view has been resized and the columns are much smaller. So if I press here, you can see this green outline. This is the first column. If I press here, this is the age column, which is the smallest one. And we have 2 others here as well. Okay, so we have created it. We have the appearance of the interface. Next, what we want to do is we want to load the data. To do so, we're just going to create a function that we call, this will be load data. This is the name of the function. Then I'm going to go ahead and create it. So this will be def load underscore data. the next thing I want to do is I want to import the package which will enable me to work with Excel files using Python. This package is called import openpyxl. To install openpyxl, simply what you need to do is you pull up a terminal, you head here and you just say pip install openpyxl. In my case, I have it, so I'm not going to run this. However, in your case, just press enter and wait a few seconds or a few minutes and it should be installed. If you don't use the integrated terminal that you have inside VS Code or whatever IDE that you're using, you can use a regular command prompt, the CMD on your desktop, to actually perform the installation. After you install it, you can actually import it, as you can see right here. And now we can start to work with our Excel file in Python. Okay, so we have created the load_data function. First things first, I'm going to specify the path of my Excel file. This is going to be people.xlsx. So this is going to be my Excel file. After specifying the path, I will simply load the workbook. So I use openpyxl to .load_workbook to load this path into this workbook variable. Now that I've loaded it, I need to reference the sheet. So sheet will be workbook.active. What does this mean? So on any Excel file, if we go back to Excel here, you can see that you can have multiple sheets. So when we say workbook.active, we're getting the active sheet from this workbook, or the sheet that is currently open. And in this case, we only have one sheet, so this is going to be sheet 1 anyways. So you don't have to worry about this really, but if you had multiple sheets, this is what workbook.active would mean. Okay, so now we have this sheet. We want to read the values from this sheet. To do so, it's very simple, one line of code, and this is going to be list_values, and we say sheet.values, and we convert this into a list. I can also print them out so you can see how it looks like. Let's actually run this and see what this load data function does. And as you can see, if you scroll here, you can see in my output, I have all of my data loaded as a list of tuples, and you can see all the information of the users is here. It's not yet inside the Treeview because we haven't written any code to put it here, but I was just trying to show you how you can read all the values from the Excel file using openpyxl. All right, now the next thing we want to do is we want to add the column names to our Treeview. To do so, very simple as well. So we say for column name in list values sub-0, and then we just treeview.heading the following. Let me explain this code bit by bit. So list values sub-0, what this is, if I open up my output again, you can see that this is a list of tuples. So list value sub-0 is this very first element in my list. So it's going to be the names of the columns. So name, age, subscription, employment, these are the columns that we want. So when I say list values sub-0, this is the part that I'm getting. Next, what I'm doing is I'm specifying the heading of the Treeview. So I say treeview.heading, meaning I want to put my column names on my heading of the Treeview, and then I will say call_name. So when the name of this column internally is, for example, name or age, I want to set the text to the same thing. So now if I run it, as you can see, we have our column names now. So you have the name column, age column, subscription, and employment. Also, one thing we can check is if we change the mode, you can see here that it's now in light. So closing this, the next thing we want to do is we want to load the rest of the values. To do so, we just do the following. So we say for value tuple in list values, and then we slice it starting at index 1. Why do we do that? This is because index 0 is the column names, and everything from index 1 and onwards, this is going to be the names of, or actually all the information related to the users. So this is list values sub-0, and then this is list values sub-1, and everything else after it. So this is what we want to load into our Treeview. And now we just do something very similar to what we did before. We just say .insert. We say we start at blank. So we start at the very start, and we say tk.end, and the values are going to be equal to the value tuple. So running it, now you can see all of our information has been added to this Excel file. You can scroll with this scroll bar right here, and you can actually see all your data. You can highlight the column name here, you can highlight data, you can select this, select that, and so on. All right, so we have loaded our data. The next step we want to do is to actually insert new information into this Excel file using the insert form right here. To get started, the first thing we need to do is we need to call a certain function when we click on the insert button. To do so, we link our button with a function using the following. So we say command equal insert row. So similar to before when we said command equal toggle mode, here what we're doing is we're linking this insert row function to this button. So when the user presses this button, what's going to happen is it will call this insert row function. Now we go ahead and create this function. We just say def insert row. Then what I'm going to do is divide my function into 3 different parts. The first part of my function is going to be retrieving the data from the different entry widgets in my application. Then I'm going to insert the row into the Excel sheet. Then not only will I insert it into the Excel sheet, but also I want to insert it into my Treeview. So I want to also be able to see it in my Treeview, the one that I have created right here. Now to do so, first let's start by getting the information from the widgets. So we have here these 4 different widgets for the information. First thing, we want to get the value of the name. To get the value of the name, very simple, we just say name equal name underscore entry dot get. This will get me the value from the entry which has my name in it. This will get the value as a Python string. Next, what I want to do is I will get the age. Here I do the same thing. I say age underscore spinbox dot get, but then I'm going to convert it into an integer. You can or cannot convert it. It's no problem here. You can keep it as a string, but I choose to convert it into an integer. Now, I have the name and the age. What I want to get next is the value here from this subscribed dropdown. So it should be either subscribed, not subscribed, or other. How do I get the value from the dropdown? Simply, I just say status underscore ComboBox dot get. So the very same method that we're using. Finally, we want to get the value of the check button. Now, in this case, the check button can have 2 different values. It's either true or false. So remember how we associated it with a Boolean variable before? So here, this a equal tk.boolean var, this Boolean means that the value is either true or false, not employed or unemployed. So how can we convert it to employed or unemployed? Simply, we use this line of code. We say the employment status is equal to employed if a.get, so if this is true, else just say unemployed. So if it's true, put employed. If it's not checked, say unemployed. Now we have all the information from our inputs. We can actually try to print it out, and I will show you how this works. So let's run it. And now if you see here, let's write, for example, the name John. And then the age, we can just select anything here using the Spinbox. Let's say he's not subscribed, but he is employed. If I press on insert and if I scroll down here in my output, so this stuff is still related to the Treeview. This part right here is what we just printed. We printed the name, age, not subscribed, and employed. This means we have successfully gotten all the information that we wanted. We want to insert this row into the Excel sheet. So to do so, we're just going to connect to the Excel sheet again using openpyxl. So the same method, we specify the path, we load the workbook, and then we set our sheet to workbook.active. Now that we have this, what we're going to do is save the values of the row inside a Python list. You can use a list or a tuple, it's the same thing. So here, we're going to say name, age, subscription status, employment status. So the same things that we printed before, we're just going to save them in this variable. And we're going to append it to our Excel sheet like this. So now we say sheet.append row underscore values. One thing I want to tell you is that you have to make sure to close your Excel file and not have it open. So Python cannot write to this Excel file unless it's closed. Otherwise, the permission will be denied. So I'm just going to close the file. The last step I want to do is I want to save the new changes. So I say workbook.save into this path. Now let's run it and try to test it out. So running it, let's write a name here, for example, JT, and let's specify an age, and let's say other and employed. So if we press on insert, now it should have been inserted into my Excel sheet. So if we open up the Excel here, and we scroll down, you can see JT23 other employed has just been added to the Excel sheet. One thing you can note, however, is that it hasn't really been added to the Treeview. We need to do this ourselves as well and as an additional step. Now to do so, Very easy, it's just one line of code. We just say treeview.insert, similar to before. We say here from the start till the end, and the values is equal to row value. Let's run it and test it out. Make sure you have closed your Excel sheet. So let's open this, and let's say, for example, Jane Doe, and let's give her an age. Let's say not subscribed, and let's say unemployed. So if we insert it and we scroll back here, you can see that Jane Doe has been inserted into the Treeview. Let's go ahead and open up the sheet as well. So she should have been inserted into the sheet. And as you can see, the Jane Doe data is here as well. All right, one very last thing I want to do is I want to make sure that after we insert our data, that this information here gets cleared and reset to the default values. This is simply because we don't want to keep this information. It becomes very annoying for a user trying to fill in multiple different people, that they have to keep erasing everything and so on. So let's reset this to the default values. So let's say here, first thing is we want to clear the name entry. So we just say name entry.delete from 0 till the end. This means delete everything. Then we want to insert the default value, which is the name. So now it should write name as we had it before. It should say name as a placeholder. Now we want to do the same thing for the age Spinbox. So we delete everything, then we insert the word age. Then we want the ComboBox to be set to the first value. So we set it to combo list sub 0. This means it will be set to subscribed again. And then the employed, the checkbox, should be not selected. So we uncheck it right here, like so. So running it, let me show you an example. So let's just write anything here, give it any age. Let's change this to other and make it employed. So if we press on insert, now it should have been inserted. You can see it at the end of the Treeview, and you can see here that everything was reset to the original values, to the original default values. Alright, so that is it for this video. Congrats on making it this far. So we have created an interactive Tkinter application that works with Excel. We can both read from the Excel file, display it in a Treeview, but also insert new data into the Excel file using this form right here. So please let me know if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.